So, James, there seems to be a reoccurring theme in the Western liberal democracies at the moment.
There is, yes.
And that is a brutal crushing of any resistance to empire or the genocide that's going on at the moment.
Absolutely. We are seeing this essentially, I'd say primarily in the United States and in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
We have seen a bit of it in Australia as well in terms of suppression of the media and kind of what narratives are allowed to be published and which ones are not.
Yep.
However, not to the same extent that we've seen in the United States and in the UK.
Yes, we've seen Trump deporting students that have stood up for Gaza.
Yes. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if anyone knows this, but obviously, as part of Trump's big, beautiful bill that he's passed recently, I believe not only does it include all the kind of classic fascist kind of playbook elements of redistributing a huge, I believe it's the largest wealth redistribution in history, from the working class to the wealthy elites that rule the country. The decimation of what little social services they had left, but also alongside that, hand in hand, was the huge boost in funding to ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency, alongside the construction of, what we can call concentration camps. So, which I do find quite amusing because now ICE, I believe, is in terms of all the branches of the US Armed Forces, ICE is the one that is actually receiving the most funding.
Yeah, right.
I believe they've got an extra 130 billion or something like that.
Yeah.
It's around that number. Don't quote me off the top of my head. However, that is required because what is going to start happening is these forces will be used for internal repression.
Yes.
As
we're seeing at the moment.
So we're seeing, again, not only foreign students, getting deported, but I believe pretty soon people with any sort of political views that are not aligned entirely with the capitalist ruling elite in the United States, they will be subject to the brutality and the crackdowns, which ICE will have been provided the tools to complete.
Well, there's now reports coming out that Trump wants to start deporting dual citizens or people of national heritage outside of the US that speak up against the administration.
And I find there's a delicious irony to this. And irony is going to be a theme, an ongoing theme for this segment here. There's a delicious irony because can you imagine if the Native Americans started deporting European descendant Americans?
James, they don't have any political power.
Of course. Well, exactly. That is why. So that's what's happening in the US. Scary stuff. To all our comrades over there, stay strong, keep fighting the good fight. What's also happening is in the United Kingdom, we're seeing massive public awareness of the crimes that the United Kingdom is complicit in.
I would just like to point out that some of the largest demonstrations in support of Palestine have been continually coming out of the United Kingdom.
Correct. And we're also seeing in the cultural sphere, for example, massive backlash against the existing establishment.
Yes.
So I wanted to talk about the recent Glastonbury festival, music festival that happened in the UK. Specifically two groups. So obviously the controversial Irish rap trio Kneecap, who have gained a huge following in I'd say probably in the last 12 months or so, because of their unwavering support for Palestine, for the people of Lebanon, for example, very strong anti-Zionists.
Yes.
And obviously that carries on in the Irish tradition.
Yes, James. Yes, the words out my mouth, being Irish, they understand a thing or two about Anglo-imperialism.
Absolutely. So, and they, I believe, have used their platform to push that message, which I think is very important. And I think they've actually, to a certain extent, reignited that kind of fervour for complete Irish independence amongst the population. For example, lots of their music is spoken in the Irish language.
Yes.
And I've seen videos online of people talking about how this has actually prompted them to start speaking in Irish again. People that obviously, for the most part, in Ireland and in Northern Ireland, in occupied Northern Ireland, in the occupied 6 counties, don't, there's a small population that's kind of diehard and they use Irish as their first language. However, a lot more people are starting to embrace that part of their cultural identity, which I think is super important, because that was one of the tools that the English used to subjugate Ireland, was the erasure of the language and therefore a partial erasure of the culture. So Kneecap played at Glastonbury. They were one of the most popular acts. There are a bunch of other awesome musicians and groups there, but this isn't a musical pod, so we won't go there. But in there, the BBC had a bit of foresight and realised, hey, let's, just to keep everyone happy and keep our establishment happy and unoffended, let's not live stream Kneecap's performance. So that wasn't on the primary live stream. You can still find footage of their concert, and it's everything you'd expect. Loud, lots of the kind of pro-Palestinian sentiment, heaps of Palestinian flags as well. It's actually quite shocking, and I think that's one of the reasons why the BBC higher up wouldn't have wanted to broadcast it, because it was just a sea of Palestinian flags, essentially, if you've seen the footage.
However, the BBC didn't know that instead they would be broadcasting a set by Bob Vylan.
Bob Vylan, exactly, who are kind of like a punk rap duo from England as well. And we have all seen the footage by now of them obviously spurring on the crowd and, saying, the front man saying, free Palestine, and then, the crowd chanting back. And he goes, all right, I've got a new one for you, death to the IDF, and which the entire crowd of several thousand people enthusiastically repeats that chant back to him. So I do think there is a bit of a, shall we say, a popular sentiment in the public, especially the young people of the UK, that completely agree with what he is saying.
And as a footnote, James, I think it's worth highlighting that chant was directed at the IDF as a military institution that is orchestrating a genocide against the Palestinian people, not against Jewish people themselves.
Yeah, of course. If I was a French resistance fighter in 1943 and I said death to the SS, I don't think anyone would have any qualms with that statement.
Correct.
But of course, given the civility of the British.
And also, I'd like to add that if they were chanting, for example, death to the Russian military or death to Putin, this would not be an issue worth discussing.
No, it wouldn't have. I think you'd have figures like Keir Starmer, possibly himself in the crowd, joining in on the protests.
Correct. He might actually be crowd surfing, chanting death to Putin.
Absolutely. It's wild. But this is, I've just got a quick montage here of some of the backlash in the British establishment media, who I think it broke their brains a little bit, and I do find that hilarious. So we'll just have a quick look.
Well, I thought it was appalling, to be honest. It does evoke some of the worst moments in human history, shall we say.
People question how on earth could Hitler ever have happened, point to Glastonbury and say, that's how.
Ignorant people who were waving Palestine flags at Glastonbury.
They're being indoctrinated at Glastonbury.
It's appalling, isn't it?
What I found more shocking was the crowd singing along.
That just perfectly exemplifies how out of touch the British media class.
A bunch of people that essentially live in a hermetically sealed bubble in London, probably some of the, per capita, some of the wealthiest people on earth, just being, look at all these young people, they're completely indoctrinated, and
attributing a music festival to Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's funny because the freak out by the establishment, I believe, perfectly personifies that the weaker the empire is, and I'm talking about kind of the Anglo-American hegemony over the world that they have collectively enjoyed for the last, couple hundred years, is starting to get weaker and weaker. And I think these people don't know how to handle it.
And as the demographics in the West start to change as
Absolutely, yeah. And so there's more people in the UK that aren't, shall we say, necessarily of quote unquote like Anglo descent.
Yeah, Anglo descent. So they still see themselves as British.
They still see themselves as British, but there's a lot more, and the same within Australia.
Yes.
But there's a lot more people that, of Middle Eastern, South Asian, North African kind of descent amongst many other parts of the world. Yeah. And I think they identify quite strongly quite strongly with these ideas that are being represented here.
Yeah.
And it's funny because in response, for example, like the Glastonbury, like the people that run the festival,
They came down and condemned it.
They've came out super hard. And all the standard kind of we don't have room for this anti-Semitism, etc., etc. So I believe Bob Vylan their management has dropped them. They've had their US visas
That's no surprise.
revoked, which is no surprise. And so obviously their career in the mainstream is facing a lot of issues. However, I would like to say I'd never heard of Bob Vylan before.
Yeah.
Every single day since Glastonbury, I've seen just their name in the headlines.
Yeah, it's probably good for his career in the long run.
Yeah, it is probably good for their career in the long run. And obviously a group like Kneecap, for example, as well, actually have huge, huge support, whereas Bob Vylan are a smaller group. And I think Kneecap will continue to be successful and have a career. But it shows how if you speak out as an artist, and especially if you're like a smaller artist, obviously we've seen people like Macklemore, Roger Waters, for example, where they have the ability to speak out and have like a strong political message, and they don't have to worry about the backlash. Whereas people like Bob Vylan, they do have to worry about the backlash. Of course. They need to earn a living, and those are the tools that the establishment uses to suppress them. Same with like British rapper Low Key. He's also faced very heavy repression.
This isn't new in some ways, though. I just thought I'd add that there's a lot of parallels between this and Woodstock during the Vietnam War. And I just don't understand why the British establishment is so surprised that something like this is happening. When during the Vietnam War, many musicians came out in spite of their career, jeopardised their career to speak out against the US war in Vietnam.
And I imagine lots of those crusty old British establishment media types that were just condemning with horror the performance and the chants. I imagine they probably back in the day would have viewed themselves as pretty progressive, and they would have been the muddy hippies at Woodstock. I think a large portion of them would have.
I don't know about those specific media commentators.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But it is really interesting, and like this will continue to happen, and it will continue to get worse as well. So another thing that they have done in the UK is there has been a new terrorist group added to the list, Jordie.
That there has.
And this is where I'm going.
This, I believe, is a group that's going around orchestrating criminal acts of sabotage. Planting bombs in people's homes, car bombs in the city and whatnot.
Car bombing, gunning down innocent men, women and children as they line up for aid, bombing civilian areas.
So is this the IDF or are we?
Oh no, Jordie. I'm talking about Palestine Action.
Of course,
Palestine Action here. Palestine Action are a direct action protest group.
Yes.
And now we need to be careful about what we say, because as of
this morning,
I believe about this morning, they have been proscribed as a terrorist organisation
in the United Kingdom.
Now, obviously, we are in Australia. We are not in the United Kingdom. However, I think it's best that we understand how Australia does kind of act in tandem with the United Kingdom.
Through the Five Eyes intelligence services.
Of course. And so essentially what's happening is that Yvette Cooper, who was the Home Secretary of the UK, announced this last week that she decided to prescribe Palestine Action under the Terrorism Act. So this would outlaw the group from operating in the United Kingdom and place them in the same designation as groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Yes.
This is the first time a direct action group. This is quite unprecedented. However, not really surprising in hindsight when you look at the broader picture of how imperialism in crisis has to essentially crack down on the home front.
And the reason it's not surprising, James, I add, is that they were being very effective in costing weapons companies directly linked to Israel a lot of money and shutting down production quite effectively.
So they have realised that, and this is part of the whole the strategy of direct action. Is that the idea is to hit the capitalist where it hurts them, in their wallets,
and non-violently.
So they're a non-violent group. And essentially what they do is typically stage protest, stage stand-ins, They have been known for example, breaking into factories. They noticeably have targeted Elbit Systems, which is, I believe, Israel's biggest defence contractor.
Which produces weapons in the UK.
In the UK, yes, because they have numerous branches in the United Kingdom. So they've repeatedly, so they do the kind of things like they would, for example, break in, trash the offices, and just spray red paint over everything.
Yeah.
So just disrupting, being an absolute nuisance.
Yeah.
But they've realised that this is the best way for the common person, and obviously Left Foot Media, myself and Jordie, do not condone any of these actions, but this is their strategy. They have realised that this is the best way to disrupt what is going on, is instead of, for example, going through the kind of liberal institutions and politicians that we're told, hey, you live in a democracy, you can, if you have an issue with something, you can write a letter to your MP, and then they'll do something about it. So obviously they've realised that that is all kind of a sham.
And it can be argued that they're upholding the responsibility to protect, or the right to protect, a group that is having a genocide inflicted upon them.
They are. So they are, I guess...
And that is enshrined in humanitarian law.
Yes, it is, for example. So if there is a serious violation of human rights, like a genocide, going on, it is up to everyone else to do whatever they can to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, and within that framework, it can be argued that that is what Palestine Action is doing.
Absolutely. Same with Iran, and same with Yemen, for example. So they actually received this prescription on Wednesday, with the British Parliament voted 385 votes to 26 votes, all in favour. So if you're a member of Palestine Action, or you're inviting support for Palestine Action, you can incur up to a 14-year prison sentence. So if I was to, or if you lived in the UK and you were to buy a Palestine Action hoodie, for example, to support the group, you could, that in itself would carry up to a 6-month prison sentence. So it kind of shows how they've obviously, the British government has always supported the Zionist entity in occupied Palestine. However, their direct role in the ongoing genocide has never been more obvious. Some analysts have called it a tripartite genocide. So that refers to the culpability of the UK, the US, and Israel in all being directly responsible.
Of course. Yeah.
So without their unwavering support of the UK and the US, Israel would not be able to do what they're doing. So they have provided material support, direct technical, logistical support. US spy planes regularly fly over the besieged Gaza Strip and supply the Israelis with targeting data, which has been used to further facilitate death and destruction. It's quite probable that the Israeli strike on the World Central Kitchen workers, which I believe killed an Australian and British citizens.
Frankie's own,
that UK spy planes were likely providing reconnaissance for the Israelis. However, no one in the UK, obviously we've seen massive protests worldwide, all over the world, but no single group has actually taken it upon themselves to stand up and do anything directly about this. So, like I said, they specifically targeted UK-based branches of the Israeli weapons manufacturer Elbit Systems. So they've stormed, drone factories, aircraft manufacturers. They've gone into universities. So they just generally cause a headache for all these people. Yeah. And they, with the aim to disrupt supply chains and spread their message, essentially. So their ideology is based around the reality that appealing to the institutions and politicians that are complicit in the crimes, instead of appealing to them, the group is just like, we're going to do it ourselves. We're going to make these necessary changes ourselves. And this strategy has been actually quite successful.
Yes.
So they've caused numerous kind of machining manufacturers and parts manufacturers to cut ties with Elbit Systems throughout the UK. Yep. They actually caused Barclays Bank to divest from Elbit Systems, which is huge. And they've also caused Elbit to shut down their operations in Tamworth, abandon their HQ in London, and they shut down their subsidiary Elbit Ferranti in Oldham. Lots of their members have been arrested and faced, a night or two in jail, etc., etc. However, the most recent prescription of adding them to the as a terrorist group That comes after they broke into an RAF base, RAF Bryce Norton, on electric scooters and used repurposed fire extinguishers to spray red paint into the engines of 2 RAF Airbus A330 refueling planes. So this base in particular is used to send RAF planes to the RAF Akrotiri base in Cyprus, which is kind of where the British regularly conduct these reconnaissance flights from. So that seems to... They caused a lot of damage.
Yeah.
I believe they caused a few £1 million in damage in doing that. But it also does lead kind of to the security question of, well, how did a bunch of activists
on e-scooters
probably
vaping, may I say?
probably vaping, break into an RAF base? You know, what were the RAF doing? And I do, to a certain extent, understand that from a military security point of view, I can actually understand where, as the state, to a certain extent, I don't agree with them morally, but I understand where they say this is a security risk. This can't happen again. You can't have people breaking into military bases.
Yeah.
To which my response would be, well, look, I understand, but at the same time, like, where is your security? Yeah. What are your soldiers doing? What are the people that are stationed on the base doing? That just should not happen. But and I think that's kind of what spurred this designation. This most recent act of protest and disruption. So huge backlash. You know, you've got like your Jeremy Corbyns, lots of public figures in the UK and around the world, groups like Amnesty International saying you can't prescribe a direct action group as a terrorist organisation, especially when you're arguably supporting terrorism overseas.
Of course. Could I say that Jeremy Corbyn stood up in the British Parliament and voiced concern because what they did with this bill that prescribed them a terrorist organisation is that they put other groups, one was a white supremacist group, and the other one was a pro-Russian imperialist group as well.
Wild that exists, by the way, but yeah.
Into the same bill with Palestine Action to designate them a terrorist organisation, making it basically impossible for any members of parliament to vote against it. And Jeremy Corbyn stood up and said, well, we need to vote on these independently because myself and others are very concerned about designating a group, a protest group like Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation. Correct. So I thought that was interesting, the way the state put it together, rushed it in and made it basically impossible for MPs to not vote for it.
And it's a technique as old as time itself. Yes. You know, they do that all the time in the United States. They do that here, and they do it obviously in the UK. So after that legislation was passed, the Metropolitan Police already made 29 arrests yesterday at a protest, ironically enough, situated near the Mahatma Gandhi statue in London. For reportedly breaching the laws and showing their support for the newly prescribed terrorist organisation. So this particular campaign group is titled Defend Our Juries, and the Met Police cracked down on them. And those arrested included a priest, an emeritus professor, numerous human rights activists, as one environmental campaigner who was there put it, quoting her, "This is worse than Putin's Russia. I don't say that lightly. It's 10 years for doing what we're doing today. In Russia, it's 14 years in the UK because of Yvette Cooper's outrageous betrayal of democracy, liberalism, and what is, in my view, a step towards fascism."
Yeah.
So it's funny, obviously, we are so conditioned to think, look at the Russians, man. It's, what an authoritarian regime. If you disagree with Putin, you get locked up.
And especially the British. They hate the Russians.
They do. I honestly think they never got over losing the Crimean War.
No,
I seriously, I think
sure.
It goes back. There's some like a weird complex they have.
Yeah.
Or people in America. Oh, look at anytime an American politician talks about freedom or democracy and uses that as kind of a tool to attack China or Russia or Iran, God forbid, they don't allow political opposition. Well, neither do you. Yeah. So, get over it. And again, I just wanted to say that this is irony is a theme.
Yeah, irony is a theme.
Irony is a theme. So the actions of the Israeli government are actually overtly terroristic in nature, and the UK and the US are directly supporting that terrorism. So the funny thing is Keir Starmer himself actually supported protesters and activists doing a similar thing in 2003 to protest the Iraq War. Yeah. Obviously, the political climate was a little bit different. And I'm assuming his Mossad handlers hadn't taken compromising pictures of him. yet. So he was a bit harder to blackmail perhaps at the time, and he wasn't in a position of power.
Just
That's a bit of hyperbole there. Apologies.
On the topic of irony there, James, did you mention that non-violent protest was right next, close to a Gandhi statue?
I did, Jordie. I did. Which, again, perfectly symbolises the British kind of love Gandhi because he was non-violent.
He was non-violent, and it was an effective tactic in the end.
It was, really. But also to say as well, they didn't abandon the jewel in their imperial crown of British India because of Gandhi's non-violent protest. They abandoned them because they were bankrupt.
Yeah, yes. But the irony is not lost.
The irony is not lost. And what is even more delicious in the irony is that the United Kingdom has arguably been one of the largest supporters of terrorism in modern times, with their direct involvement of supporting the widespread of the Wahhabist extremist doctrine in Saudi Arabia, their additional direct support for ISIS and Al-Qaeda forces in the Syrian war, as well as their direct facilitation of the perpetrator of the Manchester bombings, Salman al-Bedi, when he was groomed and extremised and sent to Libya by British intelligence forces to assist in the overthrowing of Gaddafi, only to be safely picked up from the coast of the Mediterranean by a British naval vessel, ferried securely back to the UK, where he went on to undertake one of the biggest acts of terrorism in United Kingdom history. And I'm not including their centuries of use of terrorism and colonial violence that they spearhead across Asia and Africa.
Yeah. No, for sure, James. And while we've been seeing a great deal of suppression in the UK and the US, there has been suppression of Australian journalists that have, I wouldn't even say advocated support of Palestine, merely just shared human rights reports on their social media.
That is absolutely correct, mate. I believe specifically we're talking, or you're referencing the case of Antoinette Lattouf.
Yes.
She was a journalist who's been around for a while, so she's worked at 10, SBS and Triple J, and she was fired from her job at the ABC for essentially sharing I have it here, a Human Rights Watch report on her personal Instagram page, which accused the IDF of using sexual violence, shall I say, as a weapon of war.
Yeah.
She did this without actually, posting anything. She didn't have any personal opinions or anything like that. She didn't, all she did was just share this this article. And that was enough to catch the ire of the kind of various lobbying organisations that represent Zionism in Australia.
I'll just add, James, there was a similarity in the UK recently where Gary Lineker, who is a BBC football commentator, he lost his job at the BBC for sharing a post on social media similar to this, where there was a quote-unquote anti-Semitic emoji, where there was a rat in one of the posts that he shared referring to the Israelis. He shared this and apparently didn't realise that there was a rat there, but that didn't stop the BBC coming down on him very hard.
No, and I guess in a similar vein to the BBC, the ABC promptly fired Lattouf from her job. So she actually began a stint presenting ABC Radio Sydney's mornings programs just as a fill-in.
Yeah, so she wasn't she didn't have a full-time gig. This was just a fill-in for the ABC.
A fill-in position.
Yeah.
But she did what many people the world over that have a conscience and a soul
and a social media
account have done, which is just by reposting something, and obviously that put her in the crosshairs. So she was told by her employers, who I think we've discussed on the past, the ABC are quite occupy this strange position in Australian media where they are.
It's a strange
position because they do actually have some probably the concentration of the highest quality of journalism in the country, I'd say, for a large outlet.
Yeah.
But they also are kind of very one-sided in their support for Israel.
Yes.
But then, for example, they will also post commentary and articles about their own one-sidedness.
Yeah.
So, for example, as this whole Antoinette Lattouf case has rolled out, I've seen programs like ABC's Media Watch do segments on how the ABC fired her, wrongfully fired her. And you think, you're self-aware that the organisation is self-aware, but it's the classic kind of liberal media thing of, oh, isn't this horrible? I wish there was something we could do about it. And then, 10 years later, after the things happened, they're like, oh, yeah, we were against that. And
they have to hold the pretense that they're open, balanced and fair.
Yes, exactly. Which is, it's quite funny. So what happens is lots of ABC members of the Media, Entertainment, Arts and Art Alliance actually passed a vote of no confidence to the managing director of the ABC, David Anderson, shortly afterwards, because lots of people in the ABC were not happy about this.
Of course not.
And it's the funny thing is that lots of other journalists at the ABC have actually kind of done similar things. And the ABC itself 3 days later actually ran a story on that Human Rights Watch report. So Antoinette Lattouf has actually, she filed her unlawful termination claim against her former employer at the federal court, and she asserted that her dismissal was politically and racially motivated. She is of Lebanese heritage, and also they didn't go through the correct procedures that they are required to do. So what's interesting is kind of over the course of this court case, lots of evidence came out. So there was they released a whole bunch of kind of text messages and internal communications amongst the kind of higher-ups at the ABC, including Ida Buttrose, and including one message written by Buttrose claiming that the ABC, quote-unquote, owed her nothing, so just get rid of her, essentially. We don't really care. She's nothing to us. So the ABC denied there were any underlying biases in their decision-making, but Lattouf's legal team asserted that there was like a racial motivation and just pointed out the inconsistency that, look, well, other people have posted similar things and they didn't get fired. There might maybe an internal reprimand, I don't know, but no one actually lost their job. However, the ABC has maintained that the dismissal was based on the breaching of editorial standards. So... Hilarious. So on the 25th of June, this is actually a little win. We're talking about some really horrible stuff that's happening earlier for freedom and freedom of speech in the UK and the US. This is actually a little win. So
it is.
The federal court handed down their verdict on the 25th of June, finding that the ABC had contravened Section 7721 of the Fair Work Act by dismissing Lattouf, quote unquote, for reasons including that she held a political opinion opposing the Israeli military campaign in Gaza. The ABC was then ordered to pay their former employee $70,000 in damages. And this is what I find quite interesting. The court also found that the ABC management was thrown into a, quote-unquote, state of panic by I'm quoting here, an orchestrated campaign by pro-Israel lobbyists to have Lattouf taken off air. They had therefore decided to capitulate and, quote again, appease the pro-Israel lobbyists who would inevitably escalate their complaints about the ABC employing a presenter they perceived to have anti-Semitic and anti-Israel opinions in such a public position, end quote. So the court acknowledged all this. They pretty much came out and they've looked at all these kind of internal communications. They realised, well, the ABC higher-ups, their management were just inundated under such pressure that they decided to let this person go. And it also shows, I think to me, that demonstrates really the power of the Zionist lobby.
For sure.
In the UK, with the whole Glastonbury thing in the United States, and in Australia as well.
Correct. It is nice to see that we do have some judicial independence still, that the institutions
it's hilarious.
Haven't been captured by the Zionist lobby.
Not entirely, that we do, exactly, you're right.
Just our media and politicians.
Yes, exactly, just the individuals themselves. However, in a more interesting note, the court granted a 10-year name suppression to the 9 Jewish women who orchestrated the campaign against Lattouf.
9 Jewish women.
So 9 Jewish women apparently were the ones that spearheaded this campaign. And they have all had...
Australian citizens or?
Not specified.
Okay.
However, I'd assume I'd assume most likely. Probably dual citizens, Australia is, right? I don't know. But yeah, these are the ones that orchestrated the campaign, but there's a 10-year name suppression order, so we don't know who these people are. So they're still being protected, you know. And it's funny because this whole thing has cost the Australian taxpayer over $1 million. This lasted over like a year and a half, and it just shows that the people that orchestrate these kind of campaigns and attacks essentially will try and use the powers and the instruments of the state to silence, silence the people they do not want heard. And even if it fails, the taxpayer myself is paying for it.
Yeah.
You know, it's no skin off their backs; they get protected. So yeah, it is quite funny. But I will say, as opposed to the United States and the United Kingdom, like you said, it does show there is a little bit of judicial independence.
Correct.
I'd say it's funny and again, honeyed with irony, shall we say, that the convict colony of Australia, who still has our King Charles as our official head of state, is actually more democratic. It probably has a slightly more robust democracy, shall we say, than both the UK and the US. That is hilarious. Also, I wanted to talk about very briefly in the same subject. I believe earlier this week, a federal court judge in Australia ruled that he rejected the definition of anti-Semitism that includes anti-Zionism being anti-Semitism.
And that's been a point of contention recently.
That has been a point of contention.
Within universities, within the government, because there's been strong forces or a strong push by the Zionist lobby to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism.
Semitism, yes.
Correct.
Whereas anti-Semitism is a hatred of a religious/racial group. Whereas in my definition, which I'm legally protected to say now,
are you?
What we see is that Zionism is a political ideology.
Yeah, a nationalist political ideology.
Yes, and everyone can critique
a state, a government,
for
its actions,
regardless
of the ethnicity makeup of the people in that country.
Of course, which is quite logical.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. So. Yeah, the whole thing's just an absolute shamble, but that's a little win. So we started off with all this horrible news, horrible oppression, and we have ended on a slightly higher, lighter note.
Yeah.
And hopefully we will continue to see as the how can I say, as imperialism starts eating itself.
Yep.
And they turn their tools of repression that they usually use on the periphery, as they turn them back into their domestic populations.
Turn them inwards, yes.
They turn them inwards. Hopefully we will see in Australia specifically, and in the UK and in the US and in Europe, more backlash against that.
More democratic backlash.
More democratic backlash, more awareness, and more kind of institutional backlash, where we see, for example, this federal court judge ruling that decision in favour, because that will be the only thing that will be able to protect us from the slow march of fascism.
As you said, James, I'll just add there that it is not the liberal institutions that grant us our liberty and freedom. It is us as people, as the demos.
Yes, and these are all things that people have fought and died for centuries.
And just one last thing, be careful what you share on your social media.
Yes.
Because your employers may try and terminate you for it.
Absolutely.
All right, James, let's wrap it up.
No worries, mate. Everyone, like, comment, subscribe. If you enjoy the content, then give us feedback and support, and we will bring you more in the future.
Thank you. See ya.